Hey everyone, welcome back. So, what I wanted to showcase today was an orange Terror Bass amp. This one had no power when it came in. You could plug it in, flip the on switch wherever you wanted. Nothing, completely dead. So I opened it up, and on top here we find a switch mode power supply. So I'll never claim to be the greatest person for diagnosing this stuff and whatnot, but I have enough knowledge that, if I dig through stuff, eventually I'll find the problem. And I like to showcase stuff on here that's maybe a little bit different. You can go on YouTube and do a search and find all sorts of great explanations how to diagnose switch mode power supplies. And that's all well and good. It'll point you in the right direction. This one was a little bit odd, so that's why I'd like to feature it here. So when I got this in, first thing that I do is check my mains, make sure nothing's shorted where it's coming in. We've got our two big filter capacitors. Make sure that they're doing their job, and also the bridge rectifier, which is, this is the back of the unit here. This would be the front. And the rectifier, as you can see, is over here. Positive side would be over here. And then we have a couple MOSFETs here. And then we have another set of diodes here, which are actually for the secondary side. But we'll get to all that in a minute. So after I check my caps, and I also check my my rectifier here to make sure that that we're getting AC in and DC out. That all looked well and good. And even when I checked my MOSFETs, I had 168 volts, 169 volts, actually on both of these when I first checked them. So I was sort of scratching my head. The place where I didn't have voltage was on the secondary side, which would be this side. So this would be the primary side of the transformer. This would be the secondary side, and then we have all our other caps and everything over here for the secondary side, and our coils and everything. There were no voltage or very low voltage. The 50 volt rails only had like 5 volts on them. The 15 volt rails had like 2 or 3 volts on them, but everything else had nothing. And no blown fuses either. I should note that. First thing I checked actually was fuses, and it wasn't that. So then it became an issue of, okay, how can we have voltage at those MOSFETs and no voltage on the secondary side of the transformer, but what looks like 168, 169 volts on the primary side? So I just started, when I get something like that, if I have time to do it, I have to go in component by component and start tracing out the circuit and figure out what is going on. And my suspicion was that either one of those MOSFETs was failing in a weird way, or this IC controller chip down in here was the problem. And I sort of got it half right. So if you look, maybe I got a flashlight here or something, so you can see. Maybe if I tip this up, the lighting I can get the lighting to adjust. Oh, there we go. That's a little better. Okay, so what I started doing is going through the circuit, and I knew that probably the regulation on it, because I'd taken these MOSFETs out and I checked them, and these MOSFETs in here are a little bit odd. Their switch-on voltage is actually higher than most MOSFETs, so if you just check them with the diode version of your multimeter and put voltage to gate and then check to see if it's opened, that won't be enough voltage to get it to open. I actually ended up having to hook up, I did it with a 9-volt battery and it worked. I tried it with 1.5 volts, doesn't work. 3 volts, it'll get it to open part way and start conducting. But with 9 volts, it was good. And if you look on the spec sheet, that's actually in line with what the testing parameters are. So that's all well and good. I checked the diode outputs, I think they are, on that IC controller. And those all checked out good, so I was fairly confident, and from the voltages that I read on that controller, that they were probably okay. So I started going through component by component, and then it dawned on me when I was checking those MOSFETs, that I need to be checking from source to drain on both of them, and not just from the negative source, but the source to drain on each of those MOSFETs. And when I did that, I noticed that there was a voltage anomaly. One MOSFET had 168 or 69 volts, and the other MOSFET only had like 5 volts. So that's okay. Then we've got a problem in one of either the controller or one of the components. So these components in here are the ones, and I had already checked diodes, so I knew all those were good. It was down to either a resistor or one of these little capacitors. And wouldn't you know, this little guy in here, this 10UF 50 volt that I had checked before in circuit. Normally you can check capacitors in circuit and sort of get an idea if they're good or not. Well, when I pulled that one out, it would still read almost 7 microfarad, even though it was a 10UF cap. That would be out of spec and normally something I would replace. But I checked it with my ESR meter and it read open loop. So that capacitor, that was the problem. And I can't remember what pins it goes to, but it's connected it's in one of the loopback sections for that IC controller. So I replaced that, put it all back together, and fired it up, and it works perfectly. So, and we have our voltages back again. We have 168 on the one MOSFET, and the other one that's on the just the single coil, not the loop together coil on the primary side. The other MOSFET reads about what is it, 164 or something like that, just a little bit lower, or maybe 158. I don't know. Maybe it was 10 volts lower. But anyway, either way, it's working the way that it's supposed to now. Okay, so we might as well check this capacitor. This was our problem one. I'm going to flip over to capacitance mode. So it's actually testing lower than it was the other day, but we're around 6 UF. And this is a 10 microfarad capacitor. So, you know, it's a little low. Probably a component we'd want to replace, but it's not so low that you'd suspect that it would be causing an entire power supply not to work. So let's break out the ESR meter. I highly recommend getting one of these, either one of these or one of these multi-test units. So first thing you want to do is to zero it out, and then we're going to put this on here, and this one on here, and you notice the dash never changed, so this one is open, nothing there. And the only way you could figure that out is to pull this out of the circuit and to test it on its own. Because even voltages in circuit looked like they were okay, and I didn't measure the frequency, but obviously the controller wasn't switching. So ESR, a very valuable test because everything else in circuit looked okay, but when you measure it, it is a little bit low, probably a component you'd replace anyway, so I guess you'd end up fixing it. But when you test ESR, you know that this is bad, and that's why that little IC in there wasn't doing its job, switching the MOSFETs on and off, or at least that one MOSFET. I hope maybe that helps you guys out. Any of your capacitors, if they're more than 20% out of spec, I say replace them no matter what, because it's only a matter of time before they outright fail, even if things seem to be working fine, and that doesn't end up being your final issue. You don't want that stuff in there because it's just going to cause you problems and headaches down the road. So I say replace all that stuff, and if you check ESR, ESR is a very critical measurement for capacitors. I found a lot of bad components actually looking for ESR values on stuff. So anyway, I guess that's going to be it for today, and I hope that helps you out. That capacitor that I replaced on this, in case you have to do one, is C107, so you can look that up in the schematics. Schematics are available for this online if you look in the right spots. All right, so that's it for today. Good luck out there, everybody. We'll see you next time.